Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to day 2 of the Cyber Stability Conference 2024, organized by UNIDIR. Today, we'll continue what we started yesterday. We'll continue to explore and unpack the ever-evolving threat landscape in cyberspace. And we will continue to do this along 3 key thematic areas: threats, actors, and technology. And of course, they're all interconnected. Now, let me start with threats. And I think it should be clear, and we heard it yesterday, this is an ever-evolving topic. This is not the first and not the last time that we will be addressing cyber threats. It's a highly dynamic field, but we do need to take stock every now and then, and I think 2024 marks an important date to look at cyber threats again, because we're really facing a very challenging cyber threat landscape. So in 2024 alone, we have seen continued cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, targeting essential public services, targeting services that are vital for the functioning of societies, and even humanitarian activities and humanitarian deliveries. We've seen sophisticated cyber attacks against ICT supply chains, where often a strategy of target one and compromise many is pursued, and obviously that has wide-ranging ripple effects on cyberspace and cyber functionality as a whole. And then thirdly, and you'll all be very much aware of this, we're seeing increasingly costly and disruptive ransomware attacks, with over $1 billion paid in ransom by victims in 2023 alone, the highest number ever recorded according to chain analysis. So much for threats, and really just for starters this morning. Then let me turn to actors. And the cyber domain of 2024, of course, is characterized by a very complex web of state actors, state-sponsored actors, state-tolerated actors, and then independent non-state actors acting in cyberspace. And all of this taken together, this complexity is blurring the once far clearer lines between peace and war, civilian and military, internal and external activities, and of course also between state and non-state actor activity. There is a growing reliance on technology, of course, and that growing reliance on digital technologies increases and expands the global attack surfaces. It makes ICTs an ever more rewarding, ever more alluring target for an array of malicious actors. And then rising geopolitical tensions and the challenge around attributing cyber attacks, all of this taken together may incentivize aggressive state behavior in cyberspace, but could also lead to misattribution, miscalculation, and escalation of conflict. And then thirdly, technological advances. And of course, they have been continuous and they will be ever evolving. But I do very much feel that currently we find ourselves at a brink where a range of revolutionary technologies is just about to be applied at scale, and it will affect cyberspace and our lives at large. And I'm talking, of course, in particular of artificial intelligence, which holds fantastic promise and opportunities on the one hand, but also presents potential dangers and perils. On the one hand, AI already helps cybersecurity professionals to stay ahead of emerging threats. It can analyze, as you know, vast amounts of data much faster than humans ever could. And it can proactively help us to block new types of malicious code before they're actually being applied widely. On the other hand, we have also witnessed a troubling surge of misuse of AI for cyber attacks already, status quo today. Some malicious actors are already leveraging machine learning and large language models to enhance the sophistication of cyber attacks. One example that stands out currently is probably phishing attacks that are becoming ever more sophisticated, where there's highly personalized AI-generated email phishing messages that even the most cybersecurity conscious actors would have difficulty to spot. Then, more on the horizon than acute perhaps, is the advent of quantum computing, It's a bit at buzzword stage still, I feel, in multilateral fora, but it is coming, and I think it's important for us to get a better grasp of that topic as well. It's looming large on the horizon, with already growing apprehensions that quantum technologies may both increase the resilience of digital systems for some, but they could also render modern cryptography obsolete and compromise cybersecurity for most. So in the future, unequal access to quantum may have negative geopolitical implications, putting many countries in danger of falling behind, both in terms of technology and in terms of cyber security. Now, not all is doom and gloom, and I feel that's particularly important to stress as well. Through UN multilateral discussions on ICT security, states have made significant strides over the years to build international consensus around ICT threats and avoid escalation, particularly through the successive iterations, of course, of the group of governmental experts and the open-ended working group on ICT security. The latest open-ended working group annual progress report captures a broad spectrum of concerns shared by all states. In fact, it is the longest and the most detailed list of ICT threats states have agreed on to date. From the development of ICTs for military purposes, malicious activities targeting critical infrastructure, including hospitals and humanitarian organizations, to activities aimed at undermining trust in political and electoral processes, to cyber attacks targeting the integrity and the general availability of the internet, and the alarming rise of ransomware attacks. The report underscores a growing international consensus around priority threats, as well as the need for common action. The establishment of a global repository of national points of contact, spearheaded under the leadership of the open-ended working group chair, Ambassador Gafoor, is also a cause for optimism. It marks a critical commitment of all states towards enhanced collaboration on ICT security at the international level. And through this global network, states will have new opportunities to avoid escalation, build partnerships, to better understand evolving cyber threats, and improve threat detection, early warning, and information sharing to bolster cyber resilience. And cyber resilience, as we heard yesterday in the discussions in the age of AI, is going to become a priority for all. Now, for our part, UNIDIR has long been at the forefront of efforts to unpack cyber threats and identify collective responses. We've developed a range of tools to help states and other stakeholders better understand the fast-evolving threat landscape. And this includes our work proposing a taxonomy of malicious ICT incidents, our research mapping AI risks in the cyber domain, and our work using a threat-based approach to identify baseline policies, structures, partnerships, skills, and technologies needed to implement the UN framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. UNIDIR's cyber policy portal serves as an adaptive global repository which captures both evolving national views on cyber threats and a broad spectrum of national policy responses of UN member states and intergovernmental organizations. This year's UNIDIR Cyber Stability Conference, convened just on the eve of the upcoming open-ended working group discussions, is designed to take us another step forward in building collective understanding of the ever-evolving threat landscape and to provide a platform for all stakeholders to engage in nuanced discussion on threats and policy solutions ahead of the more formal UN deliberations next week. Now, with this, it is my great pleasure now to welcome Izumi Nakamitsu, the UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, who will deliver the keynote address. And we're immensely grateful for your, Izumi, and the Secretary General's steadfast advocacy to ensure peaceful, stable, and a secure cyberspace for all. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Robin, and Ambassador Burhan Gafoor, and Giacomo, Robin. It's been a real pleasure to be associated in different cyber stability conferences over the years. And I am, again, very, very pleased to address this year's UNIDIR Cyber Stability Conference. Now, this flagship event is, and I think it has clearly become a highlight, one of the highlights of the cybersecurity calendar. And this year, of course, it is convened just ahead of next week's 7th substantive session of the open-ended working group on security of and in the use of information and communications technologies, of course, under the able chairmanship of Ambassador Gafoor. And this Stability Conference is a platform for delving deep into substantive issues, informing and also complementing the intergovernmental processes. And for that, I am really grateful to UNIDIR for continuing to spearhead these conferences, which build confidence and capacity among states and, of course, others as well. Now, last year's Cyber Stability Conference featured very useful exchanges on the applicability of international law to the use of ICTs by states, in particular rights and responsibilities under the UN Charter. A bit sensitive issue, but I thought it was very, very useful to have that conversations. Now, this year, we are presented with an extremely timely topic, and I would say, again, a little bit sensitive, unpacking the ICT threat landscape. And as Robin already mentioned, it is continuing to evolve. The threat landscape is not a static one, it's continuously evolving. Over the course of the open-ended working group, discussions on the landscape of existing and potential threats have evolved also and matured. Common understandings, I think, have emerged, including that a number of states are developing ICT capabilities for military purposes, and that the use of ICTs in future conflicts between states is becoming more likely, or I would say becoming almost a reality of today. Taking that one step further, states have acknowledged that ICTs have already been used in connections with conflicts. States have tackled a number of specific threat-related issues, including the nature of existing and emerging threats, the expansion of the number of threat actors, and the question of conversions of advancing technologies. So, the first issue on the nature of threats. Specific challenges have been highlighted from, of course, malicious software such as ransomware, wiper malware, and Trojans, to prominent techniques such as phishing and distributed denial of service attacks, and this has been talked about very much. The vulnerability of critical infrastructure and critical information infrastructure has also featured very prominently. States acknowledge that activity targeting such infrastructure can have cascading effects at a sub-regional, regional, and even, of course, global levels, undermine trust and confidence in political and electoral processes, and, of course, public institutions, and impact the general availability or integrity of Internet as well. The targeting of humanitarian organizations has been addressed also, as has the impact of ICT threats on sectors such as healthcare, maritime, aviation, and energy as well. The second area, the configuration of threat actors, has also evolved, with an increase in the number of actors engaging in malicious ICT activity. Beyond the challenges emanating from states' use of ICTs, there is rising malicious activity involving non-state actors, including terrorist and criminal groups. ICT-enabled terrorism and crime pose unique risks. Terrorists and violent extremist groups are exploiting ICTs to incite violence, of course, radicalize and recruit, spread propaganda, collect information, and procure weapons and also funding as well. The criminal use of ICTs is likewise expanding, as it provides increased anonymity flexible operationality, and easier communication for perpetrators. And all in all, the ease of access to ICTs makes the potential pool of threat actors nearly limitless. Now, individual citizens, sometimes under the banner of so-called hacktivism, are increasingly engaged in conflict through digital means. This blurs the lines between civilian and combatant and poses serious challenges to application of international law, including, of course, international humanitarian law. There is also a growing challenge of cyber mercenaries, companies and sometimes individuals dedicated to developing, selling, and supporting offensive cyber capabilities, including surveillance technologies to access networks, computers, phones, and internet-connected devices. And demand for such services is on the rise. So in this way, while threats expand, so do the number of actors as well. Now, third and lastly, exacerbating the threat landscape is the convergence of rapidly advancing technologies. Light-speed advances in technology are creating new vectors for exploitation and revealing novel vulnerabilities. Integration and convergence of such technologies, from artificial intelligence, of course, and autonomy, to quantum computing, you touched on it, Robin, can both create new threats and significantly strengthen existing ones by increasing their frequency, scale, or effect. With the growth and aggregation of data associated with new and emerging technologies, there is increasing relevance of data protection and also data security. Taken all together, it is fair to say, I think, that ICT threat landscape is complex and challenging. Thankfully, we are not without tools to respond to these threats. The cumulative and evolving framework for responsible state behavior in the use of ICTs provides, I think, a solid basis for responding to both existing and emerging threats. The voluntary norms of behavior, consistently reaffirmed by all states, do not exist in vacuum. They are intended to be responsive to threats as they evolve. For example, commitments to take steps to ensure supply chain security, you also touched on that as well, Robin, and to prevent the use of harmful hidden functions directly support threat response measures, irrespective of the nature of threats themselves. The norms addressing the protection of critical infrastructure and the reporting of ICT vulnerabilities are likewise highly pertinent and applicable to the evolving threat landscape. All this does not preclude, of course, the possibility of the elaboration of new norms, including potentially legally binding obligations to respond to distinct threats that may emerge in the future. Part and parcel of the overarching framework is the full applicability of course, international law to state use of ICTs, which must continue to guide all ICT activities in the face of evolving threats. Now, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear participants, harmful ICT activity will continue to evolve, and of course also it will diversify. And I would say this is a reality. Keeping abreast of threats and considering corresponding response measures must then remain a priority for all of us. I wish you a successful second day of deliberations, and I'm very much looking forward to receiving the outcome of these very important discussions and, of course, the next feeding into the next week's open-ended working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Izumi. Thank you very much for taking us all on a tour d'horizon around a really complex and never static, as we heard, threat landscape. I think that perfectly sets the scene for the discussions that we will have for the rest of the day. But now it is my honor to hand over to His Excellency Ambassador Burhan Gafoor, who, of course, is the chair of the Open-Ended Working Group on ICT Security. Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you very much, Robin. Good morning to all of you, friends, and also I recognize and welcome also Izumi Nakamitsu, my good friend and the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. Let me start by thanking UNIDIR for its leadership in this domain of ICT security by organizing the Cyber Stability Conference and also for focusing today's conference on current and emerging threats and their impact on international peace and security. And I look at this Cyber Stability Conference as a very important platform to build collective understanding, to have very candid conversations which hopefully can contribute to building convergence in the formal process of the open-ended working group. So I'm very honored to be invited, and I hope to offer some brief reflections from my perspective as a chair of the OEWG. First, building a common understanding of the threat landscape is an important and essential starting point for our work on ICT security. Because a clear understanding of the threats that we face as a global community provides the foundation for action. It provides the foundation to discuss cooperative measures that we should all take as the international community. And a discussion on the threat landscape also provides the context for discussions and actions on the other aspects of the mandate of the open-ended group, whether it is norms, international law, confidence-building measures, and of course, capacity building. Now, our efforts to collectively understand the threat landscape is a challenging one because, as we have heard, the threat landscape is constantly evolving. And the threat actors continue to hone their methods of attack and take advantage of new and emerging technology. And I agree with previous speakers, Robin and Izumi, who spoke about the rise of artificial intelligence as an accelerator of the threats that we are facing collectively. Within the OEWG, it is encouraging that we have seen a willingness among member states to discuss the constantly evolving threat landscape, and we have also made some progress to identify existing and potential threats as they emerge. For example, ransomware was identified as a threat for the first time, and this was done in the second annual progress report that we adopted last year. So in some ways, the open-ended working group provides a safe space for all member states to discuss the evolving threat landscape in a way that is not confrontational, in a way that is not finger-pointing, because it is really important for all of us to understand the threat landscape, because, as I said earlier, this provides the foundation for potential collective action. Now, it is therefore very good news that this conference, Cyber Stability Forum, provides all of us an opportunity to get deeper into the specific threats, in particular the threats posed by new and emerging technologies. And I hope that the conversations from yesterday and today will also feed into the discussions into next week's 7th substantive session, because that will help me as the chair to start thinking of the 3rd annual progress report, which we need to adopt in July 2024. And so any discussion here in this Cyber Stability Conference leading into the formal discussions in the OEWG in terms of identifying new threats as well as new initiatives that will help us understand the constantly evolving threats will be very much welcome from my point of view. The second point I want to make is that as the threat landscape evolves, so must our cumulative and evolving framework for responsible state behavior. For example, the norms that we agree on at the Open-Ended Working Group provides a framework for states in terms of the responsible behavior of states in this domain. And it is therefore essential that we have an understanding of how we can implement these norms in the face of new and evolving threats. Now, it's true that the norms framework that we have were designed to be technology neutral. So even as the threat landscape changes, the norms are relevant. But at the same time, we must also ask ourselves whether there is a need to update our understanding of how the norms will apply to new and emerging threats. There is also a debate within the Open-Ended Working Group as to whether there is a need to develop additional norms to account for gaps, especially in the context of evolving threats as we see them. And this discussion is an important one, because if the answer is that there is no need for any norms because the norms are eternal, we have found the absolute truth, this will guide us forever, is also something that may not pass the test of reality, because technology indeed is evolving, so is the threat landscape, as well as the actors who are involved in the landscape. So we need to keep an open mind on the need to have a discussion on how the norms apply in the context of an evolving threat landscape and whether we need new norms. And we also need to ask ourselves whether we need additional confidence-building measures to build trust and confidence in order to deal with the new and evolving threat landscape. And in that context, we need to also ask ourselves, do we need additional types of capacity building in order to respond to the evolving threat landscape? So the point I'm trying to make is that the threat landscape does not stand still, or the threat landscape is not static. I think, Izumi, you mentioned that, as well as Robin. And therefore, our framework of norms also cannot remain static. It must be dynamic, and we need to constantly think and rethink our approach. And it is in that context that this Cyber Stability Conference gives all of us a good opportunity to go deeper into some of these issues. And if you have any insights or observations about how we might be able to adapt the framework now or in the future, please do share your observations within the framework of the OEWG so that all members can have a discussions on your observations. My third and last point relates to the need for capacity building. And as I said earlier, if the evolving threat landscape is constantly changing with new threats, new actors, and new technology, as you put it, Robin, then we also need to ask ourselves whether there is an increased need for capacity building and new types of capacity building, especially for the smallest countries who are still struggling to deal with the traditional threats, let alone the evolving and new threats that is confronting all of us. And so in that context, I want to underline the importance of capacity building as a very important cross-cutting element in the work of the open-ended working group. And the discussions on capacity building, including in the context of the threat landscape, is very important to achieve our objectives in the OEWG. I think it's also important to recognize that many small countries, many developing countries are facing the challenge of developing resilience in the face of these new and evolving threats. And new technologies and the rapid proliferation are accelerating the pace and frequency of ICT security incidents, and many small countries and developing countries have the sense of being overwhelmed by these new developments, and hence the need to have a serious discussion on capacity building as well in the context of the threat landscape. Now, it is true that there are many existing capacity building programs, but we also need to ask ourselves how we can connect the dots, how we can refresh the offerings of capacity building, and how we can share lessons and best practices so that everyone who needs capacity building is able to access them in one way or another. Now, in that context, I want to bring to the attention of all participants of this Cyber Stability Conference that the Open-Ended Working Group has mandated me, in my role as chair of the OEWG, to convene a global roundtable on ICT security capacity building. This will be convened in New York on the 10th of May, and the goal of this global roundtable on ICT security capacity building is to bring together practitioners in the field of capacity building, stakeholders in the field of capacity building, as well as member states, and to have a very focused discussion about how capacity building can help all of us collectively to achieve the objective of creating an open and secure ICT domain. And it is also going to be a very important gathering of actors and practitioners and member states that will help to build confidence, build understanding, and hopefully build convergence and consensus for all aspects of our work in the open-ended working group. So if you need more information about this global roundtable, please go to the website of UNODA or talk to member states or approach my team. We'll be very happy to share additional information with all of you. Let me conclude by once again thanking UNIDIR for its leadership, for being a convener, for being an active participant in this process, because the work of UNIDIR, in my view, helps to complement in a very good way and a strong way the work of the open-ended working group. And I appreciate very much the efforts of UNIDIR in this domain. And I wish you all a very productive discussions for the rest of the day. Thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gafoor, for your inspiring remarks, for underlying how capacity building is key, the multiple effects it can have, and how it also needs to be adaptive as the threat landscape, of course, evolves. And thank you for building a bridge from Friday to Monday, so to say, by underlying how this event here and discussions this over the day-to-day are complementary and hopefully beneficial, of course, for the more formalized discussions that will take place next week. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve with this conference and why we are all here. Thank you, both speakers, so much for setting the scene so ably for the rest of today's discussions. With this now, I will hand over to the actual Master of Ceremony, UNIDIR's Head of Security and Technology Program, Dr. Giacomo Percy Paoli. He has a few housekeeping announcements and will then lead over to the next panel. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Robin and Undersecretary Nakamitsu, Ambassador Gafoor. Thank you so much for your kind words and your very inspiring remarks. Welcome back to all of you that were here yesterday, or welcome to those of you that are joining us today for the first time, whether here in New York or online. We're going to do a quick transition to invite speakers and moderator of the first panel to join us here on stage. But while we do that, and since we're running a little bit behind schedule, I'll take this opportunity to remind all of you how you can engage with us, with the panelists, whether you're here in the room or online. We're going to be using a virtual platform called Slido. You should have, if you're here in the room, flyer on your desk that gives you instructions on how to do it. It's very simple. You just go on slido.com. You enter the code CS2024, and there you can ask all of your questions. This is structured as an active dialogue, so there will not be a formal end of presentations and beginning of Q&A. Anytime you have a question, please put it on the platform, and the moderator will see them come through in real time, and will then extend them to the rest of the panelists. You can also like questions that have been asked by others, and that is going to help, again, the moderator understand how much interest there is in any given topic. Now, in my capacity of Master of Ceremony, since we're running a little bit behind schedule, and since we have a hard stop at 1 p.m., there was supposed to be a coffee break at 11:30 to 11:45. I'm going to give the opportunity to the next panel to go a little bit over time and perhaps extend the panel until 11:40 or so. And when the break comes, if I can please ask you to just use it as a stretch break rather than a coffee break. We have a big room. You can put in your steps just walking around a little bit. But stay in the room, because just the time of reorganizing the stage, and we will move right into the next panel. And this is just to make sure that all of our excellent panelists have the time to share their expertise, and that we respect the hard stop that we have at 1 p.m. for conference support. So with that, please, Beza, just join me on stage. Beza Unal, who is my colleague working here at UNODA as head of the Science and Technology Unit. And may also please invite all of the speakers of the first panel to join us here on stage. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
All right. Thank you very much, Giacomo. Thank you, everyone. My name is Beza Unal. I'm the head of Science and Technology Unit at UN Office for Disarmament Affairs. I'm joined today with 6 panelists, actually. I'm hoping not to take too much of your time. In this particular session, we are going to look at different types of malicious cyber activities undermining national, regional, and international security. Particularly, we will be focusing on 2 types of cyber threats, malicious acts. One is the ransomware as a type of an attack, and the second one is the supply chain attacks as a strategy to deliver malicious goals. Let me tell you how we are going to hold the session. There won't be a Q&A, as Giacomo mentioned. Please put your comments and questions to Slido. I'm going to be checking that on my computer that I took with me. I would like to introduce the panel of experts as well. I have 5 speakers with me here today, and then 1 speaker is going to be joining online. I have Eric Wenger, Senior Director for Technology and Policy at Cisco on my left. And then on my close right, I have Mirlinda Karchana, General Director of the Albanian National Agency of Information Security. And then next to Mirlinda, we have Pavel Miraz, Cyber Researcher in Security and Technology Program at UNIDIR. Next to Pavel, we have Kazuo Noguchi, Senior Manager of R&D in Hitachi. And then we have also Lena Connolly on my left side, Assistant Professor on Cybersecurity at Zayed University. And online, we have Timo Soni, Chief of Cybersecurity Division, United Nations International Computing Center. I hope I didn't miss any of the speakers. You can find the full bio of the speakers also on the conference booklet. Now, I don't want to take too much of time. I would like to first turn to the panelists. I would like this discussion to be interactive, so I would like to ask the panelists if you have anything to add on hot pursuit, just catch my eye, just raise your hand and I'll see you. I would like to start with Pavel and perhaps first, and then I'll turn to Mirlinda. Can you tell us about, sorry, I would like to first start with Pavel, but not on the ransomware. I'm going to start with malicious cyber activities and ransomware per se. So can you tell us about ransomware attacks and how has the threat landscape evolved over time, and what are the motivations of actors, and both state and non-state actors?
Okay. Thank you, Beza. Good morning here in New York. Good day to those of us joining us online. On the what question, at the very basic level, ransomware is a type of malicious software designed to block access to a computer system or to a specific files until a sum of money, a ransom, if you will, is paid. It typically infects a computer system or a network through phishing emails, malicious links, or exploiting existing publicly disclosed vulnerabilities in software before they're being patched through software updates. Once the ransomware payload is delivered and activated, the code will encrypt your files on the infected system, rendering them inaccessible. After encrypting files, the attacker will usually demand a payment, often in cryptocurrency, in exchange for providing you with the decryption keys to unlock the files in question. The attackers will also often impose a deadline for payment, threatening to permanently delete or publish the encrypted data if ransom is not paid. There are different variants of ransomware. There can be encrypting software. There can be a locker ransomware, which locks users out of their systems entirely. And some of the new variants, which do multiple things simultaneously. They deny access to your data, they encrypt your data, and they steal the data all at the same time. So you can see there are multiple stages. You have to develop, if you're a cyber criminal, you have to develop and deliver the payload. You have to encrypt and deny data access. You have to communicate your demands and threaten some consequences. You have to also ensure that there's a payment transfer, and you have to restore the original payment. So you can see that there is a number of things that you as an individual or a group of individuals have to be capable of doing if you want to conduct a ransomware attack successfully. And now the question, how has the landscape evolved in the last year? In the last year alone, organizations of all sizes had to cope with a huge increase of ransomware attacks, with the number of ransomware attacks tripling in size since September 2022 alone, according to a number of cybersecurity vendors, including Microsoft. Ransomware criminals are also shifting heavily toward more sophisticated and more personal attacks by A, using AI to guess passwords and create tailored and convincing phishing email messages, using encryption to conceal their tracks, and using data exfiltration methods to steal data on top of encrypting it to add pressure on organizations to pay ransom. To put the numbers on a scale of the threat, it has been reported that last year, the password spraying attacks alone, one of the most potent strategies for gaining initial access into your systems to deliver ransomware payload, have increased more than tenfold in 2023. So we had 3 billion attempts per month to guess your passwords in 2022, and we had 30 billion attempts to guess your passwords in 2023. And this is, of course, mainly thanks to advances in AI. People are not doing this manually. They're using automation to guess your password. And of course, this includes the curated list of the usual passwords, such as your family members' dates of birth, pet names, and of course, the most classic password of them all, password. But the point here being that AI can guess all of these passwords very successfully if it knows whom it is targeting in the first place. And of course, so some of the key trends in the evolution of ransomware threats really are as follows. The attacks are far more sophisticated. Initially, they were relatively simple and targeting individual users. However, modern ransomware attacks are often targeting organizations. And the target diversification, we can really see that recently because the attackers have expanded their focus to include both businesses and also government agencies, and lately, even critical infrastructure operators, such as healthcare providers, transportation, energy, or even defense. And this diversification of targets has really increased the potential adverse impact that ransomware attacks can have on national and even international security. I imagine that's something we will be coming back later on in the panel. Another important point of what has been seen in the last 2 years, there has been an emergence of something that, for a lack of a better word, you can call ransomware as a service, and an emergence of very complex cybercrime economy. In recent years, ransomware has really transformed from a model where a single individual or a group of individuals would both develop and distribute malicious cyber tools to a ransomware as a service model. So this allows one group to manage the development of malicious tools. Another group is providing intermediary services for payment and extortion and communication. And yet another group is here to actually launch the cyber attacks and decide on the targeting priorities. And this franchising, if you will, of the cybercrime economy has made it much easier for attackers to perform more sophisticated intrusions, exfiltrate data, and secure ransom payment. So to put it in simple terms, if you want to be a cyber criminal today, you can now buy an online ransomware subscription service that offers different attack methods and a range of supporting services with a 24/7 hotline support. And the cost of such subscription service on the dark web can be as low as $500 USD per year. There is also something that we see recently, and that's double extortion tactics. So attackers have started using, the attackers are no longer only encrypting and threatening not to provide you access with the data, but they're also copying your data, and they're demanding ransom payment, basically saying, if you do not pay, we will publicly disclose information that is supposed to be private. We have also seen a nation-state sponsorship. There is a growing concern about some nation-state actors getting involved in ransomware attacks, either directly or indirectly by providing support to the cybercriminal groups or tolerating their activities that emanate from their borders. And then finally, on the actor motivation, very quickly, on non-state actors, it's primarily financial gain. It can also be political goals, like hacktivism. You can get the ransom, but you can also achieve other means by publicly disclosing embarrassing information. You can also achieve societal disruption through a wide-scale ransomware attack. And on the state actor side, of course, you can be signaling to adversaries in a tit-for-tat response on the lower level of the response option menu. You also have a more plausible deniability for the attack, shifting blame to cyber criminals. And there can also be a financial gain motivation for state actors, such as access to international tradable currencies and assets, particularly for states that are under heavy international sanctions. And I'll leave it at that, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Pavel. I'm going to turn to Mirlinda next. Would you like to add anything to that general landscape? Specifically, maybe on the political and information operations, the links with that, that would be interesting to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation first. I can say that in 2022, for the very first time in history, Albanian government cyberspace was targeted from a nation-sponsored, very sophisticated cyber attack. As I'm sharing the insight of the attack with all of you, I want to emphasize that when a nation is targeted in such an attack, it's not anymore a matter of ransomware. So the reason, it was clearly political. The threat actor had political motivation. And the final aim was not to ransom, because a nation cannot be ransomed, but the ransomware can be weaponized as a clear message for the whole population. In Albania, we have everything electronic. We are offering all the central services as electronic services. This is why the malicious actor had targeted first our agency because of the impact on the Albanian population, which was going to be, as it happened, a massive attack. Ransomware in our case was used only as a ransomware decoy, just to divert our attention from the real aim. The real aim of the malicious actor was to delete and to destroy forever the digital systems and infrastructures of Albania. They used ransomware, as I mentioned, in endpoints at the very beginning, just to distract us, but the aim was the wiper, which was the final stage of their attack on all the systems. Of course, they didn't succeed because we followed very carefully all the cyber incident response protocol. They were able to delete only 10% of the systems, which we recovered very soon in a secure way because we have clear backups and disaster recovery procedures. In this attack, the attackers combined new techniques, the cyber techniques, with influence operations. Why they use influence operations? Because they want to target a specific part of the population so they could clearly spread better their political message towards the people and make them feel insecure, make them feel afraid. So this was the beginning of our story.
Thank you very much, Mirlinda. I think there's a hot pursuit from you, Eric. Just 1 minute hot pursuit. Thank you.
I just wanted to tie together, I think, a point that was made by both Mirlinda and Pavel, which is that what you described as being the franchising, I would call kind of a division of labor between different subsets of the ecosystem that become very specialized, that this helps to blur the line between what might otherwise be viewed as being state-sponsored or state-conducted activity, and activity that appears to be coming from non-state actors.
That's quite linked to the discussions, actually, that are happening within the United Nations as well, specifically on what fits as a cybercrime activity and what fits as a cybersecurity activity, and the blurry lines between the two sometimes occurs. I would like to turn now that we heard a little bit of the generic discussions, I would like to hear more about the impacts of ransomware attacks on governments and critical infrastructure systems. Lena, can I turn to you on this? How can ransomware affect national security and state security and so on? Thank you.
Thank you, Beza. Thank you to everyone. As part of my research, I interviewed many victims of ransomware attacks. My particular focus was on organizations. I came across public, private organizations, small, medium, large, from various industries, IT, construction, utilities, transportation, law enforcement, healthcare providers. And actually, it's quite hard to understand the extent of the impact of ransomware attacks unless one is a victim or maybe an external party that had a direct dealing with the victim. And I'll try and paint the picture. For instance, a police department that paid ransom because information that was linked to several investigations was encrypted. They were afraid that criminals that they were investigating at the time would not be brought to justice. A healthcare provider that was attacked twice in 5 months. Both attacks were severe. In the first instance, about 1,200 machines were encrypted. Second time, around 1,000 machines were encrypted. Doctors' appointments were cancelled. Some surgeries were cancelled. Logistics company, such company is highly dependent on digital infrastructure. So after a few hours, the impact of attack became apparent. It was very significant. Customers were already leaving the company. The owner burst into tears in front of police officers because their life's work was about to disappear. A transportation company that couldn't provide public services for several days. A small IT company that went bankrupt because the ransom was too high for them. And there are many other examples. But first of all, I would like to acknowledge the emotional toll on victims. It's incredibly hard to deal with ransomware attacks. Unfortunately, because it is digital crime, attackers don't see their victims and they're under impression that all companies set aside some kind of budget. Once they're attacked, they just pay from the budget and there is no real impact for them. But this is far from truth. There is, of course, impact on critical infrastructure, transport, health, law enforcement, and so on. But there is also an impact on the overall economy of the state because ransomware attacks are expensive. Some victims pay ransoms, and some ransoms are very high. But also the cost of response is very high. In fact, several victims that I interviewed commented that if they knew the real cost of ransomware attack, they would invest into cybersecurity. How does it cost the economy? If a company faces costs that they didn't anticipate, they will try to recover this money from somewhere. For example, by increasing prices for their products, maybe by letting people go. But one way or another, the economy will be affected. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I guess risk generally is not real, and you don't face that risk until an incident happens, and that is unfortunate that we need to work a bit more on the awareness, I guess, on the risk front. Thank you very much. I would like to now turn to a topic that generally is forgotten, which is cyber attacks against international organizations. Tima, that question, I think, is to you. How are cyber attacks kind of have an effect and an impact on the work of the international organizations and also to national and international peace and security? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me very well?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So let me start by thanking UNIDIR and for organizing this conference. And it is an honor to participate and share my views in this panel discussion. Unfortunately, I was not able to join in person, but hopefully in the future I will be able to. Before I start sharing information on how what we see as UNICC, I wanted to share a brief background of UNICC. So UNICC has been operating since 1971 and has emerged as the strategic cybersecurity partner of UN agencies and funds for cybersecurity. UNICC is supporting 60 plus UN agencies on cybersecurity, including identification, prevention, detection, response, and recovery from cyber threats. UNICC is also actively supporting agencies in responding to major cyber incidents that they experience. Going forward, UNICC is monitoring and tracking the threat landscape impacting the agencies it supports and operates globally throughout each continent. We have seen and experienced a 170% increase in cyber threats impacting our agencies. And of those 48% of these cyber attacks are aiming at access to information, which is generally internal to our organizations, primarily for geopolitical gains. 40% of these attacks are aiming at financial gains. That includes ransomware and other means like crypto mining, etc. UNICC is tracking 100 plus threat actors, targeting its partners and agencies, and 50% of those were active in 2020 3. 30% of these actors are not visible in open source threat intelligence platforms. That means that they're really focusing on our agencies. The main internal threat vector remains to be phishing. So at 55% of these attacks are started through phishing campaigns. Vulnerability exploitation is the second most used technique for these attacks. UNICC actively tracking these threat actors, and many of them are morphing their existing tools and techniques and procedures to acquire their ambition of gaining access to information, financial gain, hacktivism, and disruption. For instance, we observed the operations of agencies were impacted due to use of cyber offensive capabilities by threat actors and by use of commonly available malicious tools by entities actively involved in conflict. These threats have a dire impact on, firstly, the trust and confidence between the constituents and the beneficiaries of our agencies, but secondly, on the operations of these agencies, mainly of which are operating in conflict areas and under extremely challenging conditions. When a cyber threat happens, we are lost. We are not aware of the process that needs to be taken. Because our agencies are operating under the UN privileges and immunities, we are not sure whether we can reach out to local law enforcement. And therefore, it is very complicated to even respond to these cyber attacks that are experienced by our agencies. We do see ransomware, third-party supply chain attacks, and we also see attacks in which financial motivation is the main goal. So I'll stop there and hand over back.
Thank you very much, Tima. We haven't yet heard from the industry side of the things, so I'm going to first turn to Kazuo perhaps, and then Eric to you. What are the key threats to the industry, and how does the industry address security threats like ransomware attacks? What are the recent incidents? What are the best practices in this area? Kazuo, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. I'm honored to be here from one of the industry companies. We got hit 2017 by WannaCry, and immediately we created the team with 400 people, assigning CISO and so on. And at that time, it was very unknown what it is. And eventually, the backup system itself was kind of hacked, could not recover, and coming from the different part of the globe, small part, and then impacted everywhere in the whole supply chain, eventually headquarters too. The another incident was an independent one, was kind of manufacturing and domestic, but impact was about a couple of 100 million estimated. But it's also difficult to estimate all impacts, internal impacts for the incidents. And I was hearing that the cost for whole global industry is 20 to 40 billion B. That's quite a big impact to the whole industry and increasing every year. As Pavel mentioned that sometimes 3 times, but I'm hearing like 70% every year, that cost. And whether or not you pay the cost, there's no guarantee to recover or not. So that's a thing. And as a company, we are also hearing that although 50 countries agreed not to pay, but is that good or not? That is always the debate. So there's no guarantee how we can deal with it. And also, ransomware originally, like ransom plus malware, but as I was hearing already, there are some different purposes, double extortion or triple or multiple, targeting with some of the social engineering weakness of the human emotion as well that we are hearing, and how to deal with it is the kind of training, so what it means, and to prepare those extortions. And that's the baseline and the targets. Yeah, we have the critical infrastructure such as electric grid and the water and some part of the healthcare. But the healthcare, I was hearing that a big vulnerable part as a whole chain. And how we can address these? Again, consistent data backup. That's one thing. It's costly for whole supply chain. Lessons learned of the WannaCry was that the data backup itself didn't work. So then how we can do better is kind of layered by layered or region by region, different backups. And then even though there's one part was kind of locked, but you have some others too. So those are part of the best practices, and update constantly software or the passwords and end user education. All in all, how we can strengthen or reduce or risk of the vulnerability every day, including automated tools using AI, that's coming up. But AI misuse is stronger at this point. How to make sure strengthening using automated tools so that we know what's really happening as a human's eyes, and report constantly and communicate among ourselves, different business with the board as well as the national level CERT or CCERT or product-based these days.
Thank you very much, Kazuo. I also see online the mention about AI models as well, quite linked to your point. AI models relying on large data sets for their training, and it's possible to actually inject malicious or manipulated data into the training sets. The participant says a lot can happen. Your views on that? So I think you already covered and touched on some of those elements. Eric, can I turn to you on the industry-related elements? Thank you.
Thank you to UNIDIR for the opportunity to join you here today, and for all of you for your attention. I agree with much of what my friend and colleague Kazuo has already explained to you about the importance of training users, of updating technology, of looking forward to the future where we can leverage AI to potentially boost human capabilities to find and fix and remediate problems. But I wanted to back up for a little bit to talk about a key element here, which is the frequency of these attacks sometimes helps us or causes us to overlook key turning points. And for me, the attack on the Colonial Pipeline in 2021 represents a key example. It brings into focus the impact of cyber and cyber attacks on our physical world. Notably, the attack did not physically disable the pipeline infrastructure itself. It was the risk that the back office IT systems which were infected might spread to those operational technologies that necessitated taking the whole system offline, and then that created the disruptions in the marketplace in the world around us. That's something relatively new, the connection between the carpeted spaces where our IT environments sit and the uncarpeted spaces where machines operate. The things that think are increasingly being connected to the things that move and do things in our physical world. And we can and should take care when we make these connections, to do them consciously, to understand dependencies, and to apply resources to guard them appropriately. We should also recognize that humans have an inexorable desire to connect, that anything that can be connected will be connected. One disturbing trend is a rash of attacks that begin via vulnerable systems that are reliant on obsolete and generally untended network gear, small office and home office equipment, SOHO, typically referred to as, that is so far out of date that it can no longer be patched. Kazuo talked about the importance of applying patches, secure configurations, but we have a great deal of technology in the environment already that is so old that it cannot be used securely any longer. The recently publicized Volt Typhoon attacks use this mechanism, and this becomes a powerful vector for adversaries who seek to disrupt the kinds of critically important but chronically underfunded institutions that were discussed earlier: water treatment plants, power distribution, education, and in the news today you can see attacks that are hitting healthcare. At Cisco, we have experience both advising victims. We have a Talos threat intelligence incident response team, and we also have a lived experience having been attacked by the Lapsus ransomware operation in 2022. The latter helped us to better understand how to leverage multi-factor authentication and other technologies to detect, respond, and recover from attacks, and then also to advise other companies that are experiencing these things now. What we saw was the importance of stronger user education about how to spot multi-factor authentication evasion techniques. There are tactics that are deployed to overwhelm users so that they accept multi-factor authentication pushes. We also need to give them, the users, a way to alert their IT management when they see things that are anomalous. When you get a push that didn't originate with something that you did, you have to have a place that you can go and say, I didn't do this. We need to strictly enforce minimum device security states and block access from devices that we have not seen or that we know to be poorly managed or unmanaged. We need to segment and isolate and protect the crown jewels, as Merlinda also said, making sure that you have backups in place so that you can restore systems that have been attacked, and then centrally logging events so that you have the ability to go back and reconstruct things that were anomalous after the fact. So those are some of the things that we've seen, observed as being important and successful techniques that need to be more widely adopted.
Thank you very much, Eric. Speaking of, I think, recent events, Mirlanda, you mentioned about the attack that your country had faced. It would be interesting to hear about what was the attack, what happened, and what are the lessons learned from that. Can you talk us through that incident itself? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Firstly, I wanted to thank the U.S. State Department. Them, through the intervention of U.S. Embassy in Tirana, helped us since the very first days with the best expertise. We had the best expert of the Microsoft detection and prevention team, and in the same time, the experts of FBI, the CAT team, which came in parallel to help us, and that was crucial because my staff, which is very experienced, could trust to some more experienced partners to be with them. When we understood that we were under attack, we decided to isolate right away the systems and infrastructures. And this is why we didn't have major damage. But what happened? This put us in a spotlight of a lot of negative media press. And in that time, we were working to securely bring back the systems because it's not just a matter of switching. You have to make sure that you destroy all the malicious artifacts in your environment, all the indicators, and your backups are back in a safe way. But normal people doesn't really understand that. Yesterday, I heard in a training that nobody ever died from a cyber attack. But we don't really know that. Why? Because e-prescription system, for example, it was for 3 weeks down in our country. So the elderly, the people which have chronic diseases, they couldn't get their medicine. So we don't know what is happening to them. We cannot say that. As I said, the attack was very sophisticated. They used 4 different teams, 2 of them for the entry point. It was a SharePoint vulnerability. FBI reports and Microsoft has clearly said that. And then lateral movement. And in the very end, they used 2 final teams for fire. For the wiping, they were some very known teams. But the fact that they didn't really have success is very important. So from 10,000 endpoints that were targeted with ransomware, only 270 they were affected. We just formatted them because there were no reason they didn't have important data. Our servers were not touched. The only thing that happened with our organization was the exfiltration of 2.7 gigabyte emails, which were exposed to show the people that they are stronger than the government and they can do everything with them. We were the first being attacked. They attacked other organizations after us, a lot of governmental organizations and a lot of private ones, banks as well. So the last attack that the same attacker had, it was during Christmas, this Christmas. But everything is always related to us since we were the very first which faced that attack. There were some very difficult months, but with the help of our partners, we were able to survive and survive in a good way. We did a lot of changes in our environment. This kind of attacks, unfortunately, happens every time, as we said, even to the giants of technology, to the banks that have a lot of budget, they have a lot of possibility to train their people. The money are never enough for those kind of attacks. Because if you are targeted from nation-sponsors, attackers, it's not because you are weak. So they didn't find they didn't find the weak point and they go to the next. They stay to target you all the time until they find the weak point and they wait there for the right political moment to strike. With the help of Microsoft, which is our partner, we have totally modernized our defense. Now we have the Security Operations Center, which is a piece of art. With the recommendation of our experts, we have totally went through zero trust architecture in all our systems. And we are developing our capacities in cyber every day. The National Authority on Cybersecurity also is building capacities, not only to help the government, but also to help independent institutions and the private ones as well. So the threat actors, which are sponsored, they are always one step ahead of us. What we can do is gather together, work with our partners, work with all the institutions in order to face them. That's the only way to build a nation critical infrastructure which is secure and unbreakable.
Thank you very much, Melinda. We're hopefully going to get into a little bit of the prevention and mitigation measures as well in a while. Kazuo, you mentioned about the whether to pay or not and that dilemma. I would like to pick the participants on that. Perhaps, Lina, you can kickstart that discussion. It's a hard one to crack, and we don't have an answer. But it's a bit of a dilemma. So can you tell us a little bit of that dilemma and what is the role of states in responding to this challenge? Thank you.
Some of the victims I interviewed shared with me this very confidential information, whether they paid or not. And as you understand, it is a very sensitive information. One of the main reasons why a victim would pay is a low level of preparedness. Inevitably, if organization has poor security posture, the severity of attack will be high, and if attack is very severe, an organization is more likely to pay. Let me give you an example. So this particular organization, a local government, they were attacked by ransomware, and when they realized they were under some form of the attack, they weren't sure what to do, how to respond. They started searching for response plans, but they only found plans relevant to natural disasters. And then, as the manager shared with me, actually their IT budget was decreased to the point that IT or security functions were almost non-existent in the organization. So the whole network was encrypted. They decided to pay, but they couldn't because they received wrong advice from one of the external agencies regarding the logistics of the payment. It was a very devastating attack. I interviewed them when they were already in recovery, 1 year and 3 months, and the manager told me that there is still a long road ahead of them. Whereas a totally opposite example, police department, they realized they were under some form of cyber attack. IT department reacted quickly. They identified ransomware, responded appropriately. It took 2 days for them to recover data. Pain didn't even cross their mind. So level of preparedness is very important. But there are other factors. For example, private organizations would be more inclined to pay because they're risking bankruptcy, at least majority of them. If a private organization can perceive that if they think they can avoid bankruptcy, they will try their best not to pay. But other factors will also have an impact. Like, for example, type of business. There's a big difference between construction and logistics company. Construction can still go on while they're attacked, whereas logistics can't. Type of data, amount of data, the effectiveness of backups. Although, interestingly, I came across organizations that had very effective backups but still chose to pay because, according to them, it is faster to recover from a decryption key rather than from backups. And they chose to pay. So I came across organizations that didn't pay because they thought it was immoral to facilitate crime. Others were afraid of secondary victimization or that attackers will not send them a decryption key. Some paid because of fear of incrimination, and I'm referring to data protection laws. So what can be done? How can we support victims? Some industries, like healthcare providers, financial institutions, already have standards, so they know what is expected, what is their due diligence and due care. I believe that similar standards should be developed for the rest of the organizations. Another one, many participants spoke very highly of police officers from cybercrime units. It's a vital resource for organizations. Not only police officers were able to help with the recovery, provide neutral advice in terms of ransom payment, but also supported victims emotionally. There is also an issue of properly funded public organizations. Regarding privacy laws, I would not suggest to compromise our privacy laws. Privacy advocates have worked very hard to ensure that privacy of individuals is respected, and there is still a lot of work, of course, ahead of them. But what could be done, maybe introduction of some incentives, for example, for early reporting, and such incentive could increase the amount of reporting and also reinforce the commitment of data protection regulations. Of course, awareness regarding private organizations that they're more susceptible, more vulnerable to the attacks. Awareness campaigns regarding secondary victimization, regarding the fact that victims are dealing with criminals and they're not obliged to send the key. And of course, awareness regarding the fact that when organizations pay, they actually facilitate crime.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to the second topic because I know that we are running out of time in the panel. The topic is on the supply chain side, and I would like everyone in the panel to speak equal time. So I'm going to first to turn to Pavel. If you could talk to us very briefly about what is the supply chain attacks and why are they so concerning, and what are the motivations behind such attacks?
Thank you, Beza. Happy to. In a nutshell, supply chain cyber attack is a type of attack that targets the entire interconnected network of organizations or systems involved in the production, distribution, and delivery of digital goods and services. And this is done through finding a weak link in the chain, gaining access, and then using that initial access for both lateral and horizontal movement across the networks and organizations. So it is really a type of attack that leverages the philosophy, as already said by the UNIDIR director in his opening remarks, target one, compromise many. The primary objective of supply chain attack is to compromise as many entities within the supply chain as possible to either gain unauthorized access to sensitive information, so for intelligence gathering, to disrupt operations, to sabotage products across the digital ecosystem, or at the extreme part of the spectrum, to pre-position malware to launch destructive cyber attacks across multiple countries simultaneously. So the attack vectors in supply chain cyber attacks include malware-infected software updates, compromised hardware components, and phishing emails that target individual company employees. This is why the least privileged access to control systems across the industry, that is access given only to those who absolutely need it and only for as limited time as possible to perform essential operations, is absolutely key here to defend against these types of attacks. I would say on why are they so concerning, very briefly, the indiscriminate nature of these attacks, arguably, is what is so concerning. Because by trying to gain access to specific organizations, you may infect the entire digital ecosystem with malicious code that can subsequently, when it becomes public, become also used by cyber criminals for conducting ransomware attacks. So I would say, very briefly, while supply chain cyber attacks in the past have been the provenance of few very sophisticated nation states, we have seen very recently that both ransomware gangs are developing their own ways to target supply chains, or they're subsequently leveraging the disclosed vulnerabilities before the systems are patched. And cyber criminals know within 48 hours of publicly disclosed vulnerability that there is a vulnerability and they're able to exploit it. I'll leave it at that and over back to you.
Thank you very much, Pavel. One of the link, I guess, between supply chain security and ransomware, we just mentioned about backups. If the organization is relying on a single supply chain, then it is even the backup system is going to be using the same supply chain. So there is that link between, I think, the ransomware and supply chain that we should also be aware of. Tima, can I turn to you a little bit on the UN systems organization side? What are the trends in terms of cyber attacks that the UN system faces? Do you see more like ransomware attacks? Do you see supply chain attacks? It would be good to discuss the two as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes, UN system does rely heavily on supply chain, and therefore we do see a lot of supply chain attacks itself. In general, since 2020, there has been a 500% increase in cyber attacks observed by UNICC towards its agencies and partners, but that's overall, it's not just ransomware, but all kinds of attacks. Adversaries are using advanced tools and techniques to target our agencies. We have observed watering hole attacks where our agencies are used as a trusted third party to further attack the actual target. And agencies experience large-scale attacks on special occasions, such as conferences for geopolitical gains. Now, our agencies operate extensively with close collaboration and support of third parties, because we are operating globally and there's commercial vendors, there are small and large not-for-profit organizations who have little or no budget for cybersecurity. So it's really complex, the digital environment in which the UN system and its agencies operate. Supply chain attacks are common, and UNICC is performing third-party risk assessments for several of the common third parties that many agencies are using. This allows the UN system to closely monitor the cybersecurity posture of the most common third parties that we are using. UN agencies operating in all parts of the world with a unique digital footprint and a very complex digital environment, which is very interconnected. The weakest link is the one that is generally being targeted, and the weakest link could be an NGO, could be a vendor, could be another UN organization that's connecting to another UN organization. And therefore, it's very complicated and not an easy problem to solve. UNICC has developed 17 cybersecurity capabilities that we are encouraging our agencies to adopt, and this will strengthen their identification, prevention, detection, response, and recovery capabilities from cyber threats. This includes raising cybersecurity awareness, because phishing still remains as one of the top attack vectors, entry vectors that cyber attackers are using. We raised awareness on more than 100,000 users last year through phishing campaigns. We are implementing governance architecture operational capabilities. We run a 24/7 security operations center, and we are also encouraging agencies to adopt the zero trust framework for every new digital product that they're building. Lastly, we are also bringing capacity building activities for our agencies, because some of them are small, some of them are big. They don't have cybersecurity experts who can help them in even detecting and responding to ransomware attacks. Focusing on ransomware, we're running tabletop exercises. Agencies experience ransomware. Sometimes they're detected very early in the attack stage, and we are able to prevent a successful ransomware from being implemented. But in other cases, unfortunately, there is a successful ransomware. Then there is a question of whether to pay the ransom or not. But we are running tabletop exercises because this is a preventive measure. This includes raising awareness on the impact of ransomware so that agencies can invest better on preventive measures. We prompt executives in the agencies to think whether or not to pay ransomware upfront, even without having a ransomware incident. And this is really crucial, because then they understand how complex the problem can be. And it's not an IT problem, it's actually an executive problem.
Thank you very much.
We also
Tima, yeah, I need to move. I'm so sorry to cut you off, but
it's okay, no worries.
I have 4 minutes left, and I really want every speaker to speak at least 2 times, and I haven't got Kazuo, unfortunately, to speak for his second round. From an industry perspective, Kazuo, could you tell us a little bit about the supply chain vulnerabilities? I promise I'm going to finish the session afterwards. Please go ahead.
Yes, I totally agree that it's very complex. And even one small vulnerable part is attacked, entire supply chain is impacted. So that's really the big thing from small thing. And a mix of the old and the new supply chain, the products are linked. Some are new, some are old. Old one is easy to be the target. And supply chain has hardware, software, some mix of IoT and the firmware built on from chips, and the human is also part of the supply chain, weakest link, and also small, medium-sized companies who do not have the capabilities that could be a target, and how to get those suppliers to dig in to validate. There's no contractual agreement or validation of those. For instance, and do you do the testing or education? They may say, oh, maybe, but never know really the level of the preparation. But all in all, all kinds of preparations and validations are needed. And the best practice, again, is that how internally prepared as well as the third parties to validate, and including commercial software and hardware. And what we are also considering is a hardware level that although zero trust is a great architecture, but maybe it's not strong enough. And also the real-time surveillance, AI is getting, once the vulnerability is kind of on the public, then immediately there are some attacks coming into. So how to prevent those at the same time? So that's automation going forward, the industry need as a whole. But all in all, it's really complex and the attackers are getting more sophisticated.
Thank you very much, Kazuo. Eric, you wanted to just very quickly, please. Thank you.
The security strategies are often designed and developed and implemented in ways that are focused on prior attacks. And that has led us a lot to focus on the networks having an inside and an outside. But our adversaries observe our efforts and how we counter their effects and their efforts, and so they dynamically change how they act in response. And so one of the things that they do is that they exploit presumptions and assumptions of trust. And this is why, as Merlinda pointed out, it's important to think about the concept of zero trust networking, where we observe and detect unexpected and anomalous patterns of behavior within a network, lateral movement within the network instead of just focusing on what's happening at the perimeter of the network. We see this right now in this Volt Typhoon series of attacks where the adversaries are gaining a foothold inside of networks and then doing something called living off the land, where they are taking advantage of problems and weaknesses that are inside the networks that they have already gained a foothold to. Final point is that we, as Kazuo pointed out, believe that AI will be an important part of the efforts looking forward, and that it has the potential to boost human capabilities so that we finally tip the balance in favor of defenders against attackers.
Thank you very much, Eric. We got questions in here on the AI side as well from the Slido deck, quantum as well. Hopefully those points will be addressed in the following sessions. I would like to close off the session by, I think, pointing out three important things. From this panel, I think what came out as a discussion item is the importance of necessary measures to mitigate the risks that could range from backups of data to keeping logs, the use of artificial intelligence, and so on. And then I think from Mirlinda's point that came out really strongly is the importance of cooperation. And that cooperation could be between different states, but also with the industry and civil society organizations. And I think the third point that I would like to raise from the UNODA side is no one is actually secure. And we heard from specific state-sponsored attacks, as well as the WannaCry attack and so on. The threat actually is cross-regional, so it might affect anyone at any time. And that's the reason, I think, why we are here today to discuss it. Thank you very much, all. Thank you.
As promised, you can stretch your legs, but please do not leave the room. We will be resuming in 5 minutes, just a time to reset the stage here. Thank you.
All right. May I ask you to slightly return to your seats, because we are about to start. And just like a quick note that at 1 p.m. We must end the panel, because we must leave the room. There won't be any more power, so we won't be able to engage in the discussion. But I just also want to inform you about that there will be a light lunch provided by us at the Vienna Cafe. For those of you who are not familiar with the UNHQ, is in the basement. When you go on the elevator, is the button 1B. And there you will have the Vienna Cafe, and some lunch will be provided. And we will have a longer break. There will be 2 hours break, and so we will be able to stretch more than we did now. So let me introduce myself. I'm Samuele Domignoni. I'm a researcher at the Security and Technology Program at UNIDIR. And it's really my pleasure to be the moderator for this panel on different typologies of cyber threats and how they relate with the framework of responsible state behaviors. As you may know, as it's already been raised in the panels that preceded this one, the threat landscape is complex, it is evolving, and sometimes it can also pose a threat to international peace and security. Moreover, as it was remembered by High Representative Izumi Nakamitsu earlier this morning, during the sessions of this last open-ended working group, member states started to talk and to discuss about specific threat typologies, including ransomware and supply chain attacks. We just heard a very interesting panel that dig deep in these 2 typologies of attacks. And in this panel, we will turn the attention on how these threats, not only ransomware and supply chain, but more broadly, like the threats that are under discussion and under the attention of the OWG, which also includes, as we heard earlier this morning, malware, different type of malwares, as well as DDoS attack, may impact the framework of responsible state behaviors, and in turn, how the framework can actually help member states in coping with these threats, to mitigate the effects and impact of such threats.
And I reckon this discussion and this panel particularly timely, as we know that at the OWG there is a particular kind of momentum to discuss the implementation of the framework of responsible state behavior. I would like to just mention that at UNIDIR we conducted several studies also on this topic, and some of them were mentioned earlier this morning by our director. And in particular, I'm referring to the Foundational Cyber Capabilities and Threat-Based Approach that really try to help member states to have an understanding of what is their own sort of contextualized threat landscape, and so how to prioritize interventions in terms of implementing the framework of responsible state behavior. So there is, again, a growing interest on this topic, and when we conceptualized this panel, we really wanted to further dig in the intertwined relationship between the framework and the threats. Very fascinating, at the same time complex topic, and I'm happy and lucky to have a very great set of speakers with me today. Let me briefly introduce them. We have Karl Karlovich Tikadze, Deputy Director, Department of International Information Security of the Russian Federation. He should join us online. I don't see on the screen. Welcome. Then we have John Reyes, Head of the Cyber Staff, Germany Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, John. It's a pleasure to see you here. And then always online, we have Anastasia Kazakova, Cyber Diplomacy Knowledge Fellow at the Diplo Foundation. And here with me in New York, we have Elaine Korzak, postdoctoral scholar, Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, UC Berkeley. Welcome. And last but not least, Eugene Tan, Associate Research Fellow, Center of Excellence for National Cybersecurity, Singapore. Welcome to you too. If you don't mind, I'm gonna call you with your first name throughout the panel to keep it a little bit more informal. So I'm glad that we have such a diverse pool of experts with me today, because again, the threat landscape can be very different according to regional, national contexts. And so by having such a disparate and varied kind of speakers really can help us to better understand how the framework is kind of impacted, and at the same time can help different contexts and different threat landscapes. You know, and I'm pretty sure you're already all aware about how to engage with the speakers using a Slido platform. I'm not going to go to repeat the instructions. You have like the sheets on how to do it on the table here in New York. And yes, so that's it from my side. I really now would like to turn to the speakers and ask how different malicious cyber activities impact the implementation of the framework of responsible state behavior. And I may ask John if you would like to give a go on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuele. And it's very good to be on your panel. Thank you for taking me on board, although I can't be in New York with you today. I need to be in Germany this time because of important national events next week, so I'll be missing Open-Ended Working Group this time. But very good to be able to join you online. Just in order to frame the discussion that we are going to have, you've asked us particularly about the impact on the implementation of the framework of responsible state behavior. So I would just like to briefly recall that we will be talking about international law, UN norms, and CBMs, because all of them constitute that framework of responsible state behavior. So I will be drawing on all three of those aspects. And when I think of the way that malicious cyber activities impact the framework, the two aspects that I would like to mention first are impacts on human rights online and on the right to privacy. Both aspects are specifically mentioned in the UN cyber norms that were agreed by the 2015 UNGGE. and both are endangered by supply chain attacks. Freedom of expression, for instance, is severely impacted by these kind of attacks that create illegitimate entry points into the work of journalists or political activists. I mention these aspects first because I believe that these threats are really universal. Human rights online, privacy online is under threat, of course, under authoritarian regimes, but also in democratic societies, because we are just seeing a very fast evolution of intrusion capabilities, of new vectors that allow expansion of supply chain attacks. And this in itself creates a risk to these aspects, because even in democratic societies where you can rely, or where you should be relying on a rule of law, it is very difficult for lawmakers to catch up and make sure that the right limits are being set for law enforcement agencies. So that's why I would really like to focus on these 2 points first. Another very important aspect is our attacks on critical infrastructure, which are also specifically mentioned in the UN cyber norms. I'd like to mention a string of ransomware attacks that have been targeting hospitals in Germany that are really the core of our critical infrastructure. So ransomware attacks on these kinds of institutions are really something that speaks very strongly in terms of risks to the framework of responsible state behavior. Another aspect that I'd like to mention are attacks on a state's sovereignty as a result of attacks on electoral processes by inserting hidden functions into critical IT infrastructure that supports electoral processes. These are really part of the core of sovereignty of democratic states. So this is another aspect that I'd really like to highlight. We have also seen ransomware attacks that have crossed the threshold of paralyzing critical functions of entire states. If you think of a ransomware attack, you usually think of a paralyzed attack that is committed in order to extract certain payments. But we've actually seen ransomware attacks that have gone far beyond that and that have paralyzed the critical functions of states. If you look at the ransomware attacks that have been perpetrated against Costa Rica in 2022, for example, you see that there were more than 30 state institutions being attacked by ransomware at a single time. So in those instances, you could also argue that these kind of ransomware attacks that cross that threshold are also going against the state's sovereignty, because they are really impeding a state's core functions. And we've seen attacks of an almost similar severity against European countries in 2022 with the cyber attacks on Albania and Montenegro, which have been wide-reaching as well. The final aspect I'd like to mention are attacks on organizations that have been tasked to uphold international law. I'm thinking in particular of the attack in 2022 against the ICRC, where servers hosting the data of more than 500,000 persons were affected and were actually hacked, and that data, which was to a large part very sensitive data, was at severe risk of being leaked. So when you see these kind of attacks on international organizations that play a key role in upholding international law, like the ICRC, this again is a direct attack on the framework of responsible state behavior. So with these few examples, I'd just like to kickstart the discussion, and I very much look forward to hearing the contributions from my co-panelists and also hopefully being able to engage in a discussion with the room. Thanks, Samuele.
Thank you very much, John. You really set the floor well for the broad impact of threats on all the components of the framework with kind of real life cases of attacks. And I would like now to turn to Carl and ask him what is his understanding of the issue, basically, from your standpoint, from your country. So please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm very pleased to participate today at this very respected meeting and address myself to this very respected auditorium. And I'm just would like to express my gratitude for having a possibility to express some of our views today regarding this very important topic. So, how different types of malicious cyber activities impact the implementation of framework or responsible states behavior? So it sounds very actual and very important, of course. And so, as I understand, today we focus ourselves on two kinds of such malicious activity. I mean, supply chain attacks and ransomware, yes, and ransomware. So, unfortunately, these are only two types of malicious activities, and unfortunately, there are much more of them. And what is worse, they are not only numerous, but they are developing, and they are developing very fast with the development of technologies. And so I should say that new technologies which are developing very fast nowadays, of course, they bring new benefits to us, but they also bring new threats and challenges that are connected to these technologies. And so, unfortunately, benefits and threats and challenges come hand in hand, so to say. And of course, we have to use the benefits, and we have to fight the threats and to overcome the challenges. So I would like to say that talking about the developing of the means and instruments of the malicious cyber activities, I would say that, as I already mentioned, they are developing, and there are probably some activities that are actual today may be modified tomorrow, and maybe there will be some new threats and challenges that we cannot even imagine today. Take, for example, the example of the artificial intelligence, which is already considered as a potential major booster for computer attacks and disinformation campaigns. So why I'm saying this? I think that singling out specific types of such activities should not be the only concern for policymakers and diplomats. And it looks more reasonable to consider a wider picture of threat landscape in the ICT domain and search for universal measures to prevent and counter such threats. Among those challenges that remain unaddressed by the existing rules, norms, and principles, we would like to point out the use of ICTs by states to undermine or infringe upon the sovereignty, violate social and economic stability of sovereign states, and interfere in their internal affairs. This is a real threat both to states' national security as well as to peace and stability at the global level. Another example that demands increased attention, in particular in terms of ensuring supply chain security, is the monopolization of the ICT market by individual states and or with their assistance by private companies through restricting access to advanced ICTs by other states and increasing their technological dependence on states dominating in the digital field. In the absence of comprehensive regulation of states' behavior in the digital domain, it is vital to avoid disproportionate measures of response to threats and further escalation of tensions. Therefore, it is essential to ensure that states cooperate with each other in good faith to overcome possible misunderstandings and address mutual concerns. To this end, and in line with the first norm of responsible behavior from the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 73/27, specific cooperation mechanisms need to be developed under the United Nations auspices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your overview of the different issues. And now I would like to kind of step back from the state perspective on the topic and open up the floor also for a different sort of understanding. We have experts coming from academia and civil society, and they can also enlighten us with their perspective. So, Eugene, if I may address you first. We talk a lot about ransomware and supply chain attacks. But I mean, these kind of, and we also heard from the previous panel that these kind of attacks have different characteristics, and some of them can spread more rapidly, others require a longer process of infiltration and penetration. So how the implementation of the framework can be affected by such variety of threats?
Okay, thank you, Samuele. Good afternoon to all who are in the room, and I also greet the panelists who are unable to join us today, and all those who actually are braving all hours of the day to be with us online. I also like to thank UNIDIR for inviting us here, and I'm greatly honored to be on this panel. So to address your question to begin, I actually see things very, very generally, much more than one would think. I generally see two large baskets of malicious activity, which are acute and chronic malicious cyber activity, very much like virology. So acute attacks require immediate action to address the malicious activity, cooperation with other states and stakeholders to address the malicious activity as priority. These can cover ransomware, distributed denial of service attacks, wiper software, etc. Chronic attacks are more insidious. They're harder to detect, even when constantly running diagnostics. These can include zero-day vulnerability stockpiling, lurking undetected in networks. This is increasingly challenging with supply chain attacks like SolarWinds in 2021 and may cause multiple critical infrastructure to crash. So I know this is contentious, but I think there is utility in disregarding the severity of any malicious activity and reducing malicious activity into these two large baskets. First, I think it will help all stakeholders to focus on the principles rather than the constantly evolving threats that lie behind responsible state behavior framework. And second, I think that severity is contextual to the level of capacity a state has, even as our conversations here have deepened and we are discussing new threats through yesterday and today. So how have acute and chronic malicious activity impacted the implementation of the framework of responsible state behavior? I observed that these acute and chronic malicious activity have fed on three main weaknesses in preventing the implementation of the framework of responsible state behavior, namely the lack of capacity and confidence, the reluctance to share information and the stockpiling of vulnerabilities, and the exploitation of supply chain for malicious activity. And these challenges are not new. So the first point on the lack of capacity and confidence, I echo what Ms. Darkwall was saying yesterday in the first session and the chair of the OEWG this morning, that the role of capacity and confidence building cannot be overlooked. This is especially in the case of acute attacks, that the framework of responsible state behavior calls for cooperative action against such malicious activity. But not all states have the confidence with other states or the capacity to respond for all requests to be appropriate. So this speaks to how states formalize in practice Norm 13H as both the giver or receiver of capacity building, which requires a lot of political will to implement. Second, I would say the lack of information sharing. My second point is the lack of information sharing and the stockpiling of vulnerabilities. In the case of what I term as chronic malicious activity, the lack of information sharing and non-reporting of vulnerabilities remain a problem for the implementation of the framework of responsible state behavior. Information sharing assumes a much greater role to implement the framework of responsible state behavior, especially with the chronic part of malicious cyber attacks. Relatedly, non-disclosure of vulnerabilities, having discovered them, is also a problem, and it's much akin to detecting a disease and refusing treatment, which speaks to Norm 13J, which is the responsible reporting of ICT vulnerabilities. And it's not just states that should be called upon to tackle chronic malicious activity. It requires buy-in from different stakeholder groups, states, the private sector, academia, cybersecurity researchers, etc., for the framework to be effective. And my third point is the weaknesses in the supply chain. So like what we have heard yesterday and today, the nature of malicious activity is also deepening, going far beyond critical infrastructure, targeting the vendors of the critical infrastructure who are by themselves not intrinsically critical infrastructure. So there have been calls by some member states to ensure operational technology remains secure and free from malicious activity. And this speaks particularly to Norm 13I, which is reasonable steps to ensure the integrity of the supply chain so that end users can have the confidence in the security of ICT products. So essentially what I want to say today is, while the threat vectors may have evolved, the principles to achieve responsible state behavior must remain the same, because what malicious activities seek to disrupt remain the same.
Thank you. Thank you, Eugene. I really like your parallelism with virology, and so the understanding of chronic and acute attacks. I'm sure that for what concerns disregard the severity of the attacks may be a little bit more problematic, and I'm happy to probably address this in the Q&A. But thank you very much for sharing your view on this. Maybe we can go now online. Anastasia, if you are there, can you navigate us in understanding better some of the complexities of the threat landscape when it comes to the implementation of the framework?
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. A pleasure to be here. I'd like also to briefly clarify that I represent DIPLA Foundation and Geneva Dialogue Process, which is an international process established by Switzerland and implemented by my organization, where we discuss the implementation of the normative framework with the relevant non-state stakeholders. So I will also rely in my response on the insights that we've been learning in the dialogue. And I'd like to focus on the root causes, which make various malicious cyber activities possible, and thus probably to complement a little bit to what previous panelists have mentioned so far. And one of the tremendous challenges that open up so many opportunities for malicious actors is low quality, low security software. Software being not a technical product, unfortunately, only, but a form of, let's say, a human expression, because it can't exist separately from the context where the products are used by humans, continues to be a tool for exploitation by malicious actors. Software manufacturers are not yet sufficiently incentivized to devote appropriate resources to secure digital products. Users don't yet demand high quality software, also because in most cases, they simply don't have accessible information to measure what makes secure and a less secure digital product or ICT. And as a result, the products or ICTs with a low security introduce vulnerabilities, including those that have been kept secret, retained, or not patched yet for various reasons, exploited by malicious actors. And such vulnerabilities remain an entry point in many cases for actors to access networks or deploy malware. We've seen that vulnerabilities have been reported to be often used in ransomware attacks, or we've seen vulnerabilities in the open source software in the context of supply chains that have been exploited by threat actors to target multiple organizations worldwide. And those would be the examples of how particularly the norms 13i and 13j could be impacted in this context. Another type and example of low security ICTs is the security misconfigurations, widely reported one of the top reasons for malicious actions. The cases when digital products left insecure with weak controls, so threat actors can easily target organizations, gain initial access, and compromise the systems by breaking default passwords, which the users or the customers haven't changed since the beginning. The situation has been more complicated with the increase in accessibility of automated AI tools, which threat actors can now use to attack organizations with a great efficiency, to conduct operations against critical infrastructure, critical functions, organizations, small and medium in a complex supply chains. And someone would respond that manufacturers should simply do much more to eliminate the easiest ways for attacks, to create them, to create further harm. And while industry is indeed the one who has lots of responsibilities in this regard, so I'd just like to stress that there's still certain challenges on the industry side as well, coming from the current tech competition environment, lack of transparency from the other actors, how they handle vulnerabilities, types of operations, how other actors also conduct in this field. And many of those more nuanced challenges explain why producing a perfectly secure product or ICT is yet a desired outcome, but not that easily achievable one. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anastasia, for bringing in also this aspect of the implementation of the framework, in particular relating to the private sectors and the development of softwares and the different structure of the market when it comes to the commercialization of certain software products. Now I'm going to turn for the last questions regarding the first topic that we are addressing on this panel. Elaine, so we talk a lot about certain threats. Maybe you can also guide us on exploring different type of threats that have been less covered over the first round of speakers. Thank you.
Sure, I'll try to do my best. First of all, thanks to UNIDIR for the invitation, and thanks for everyone who's attending in person and online. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here. Now, I'll focus my remarks, and I'll try to keep them short in light of the time, on an issue that dovetails very nicely with what John has mentioned earlier. I'll focus on commercial cyber intrusion capabilities and the impact that has had on the framework of responsible state behavior. As Undersecretary General Nakamitsu pointed out this morning, she referred to this as the growing problem of cyber mercenaries. So this is an issue that has entered the open-ended working group discussions fairly recently. Now, there's different terminology used in this space, but it broadly speaking, covers a range of activities and tools that are marketed by commercial actors, including hacking for hire services, as well as a range of surveillance and hacking tools. Now, these services, why do we care about this? It is, first of all, because these services have greatly expanded, and we've seen an increasing number of government actors using these services, and we also see this migrating into the non-governmental actor space. So we also see private actors picking up these services and these tools. So we have this problem of increased proliferation internationally, and we have, of course, unfortunately, misuse cases of commercial cyber intrusion capabilities that have resulted in a range of human rights violations and also impact the stability in cyberspace. And I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So it's quite gloomy, the scenarios that we've been describing so far, but let's now try to look at the possible positive sort of aspect of implementing the different components of the framework when it comes like to face and to cope and to or mitigate certain threats. So let's go back on our member states representative. Maybe I can start with Carl this time and asking him what's your experience like in the implementation of the framework when it comes to face ICT threats. Over to you, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Just to begin, I would like to say that quite a lot have been done since the last few years, just to create a framework of for responsible behavior of the states in this field. So just to remind you briefly, I would say that in 2015, the group of governmental experts on ICT security agreed on 11 rules, norms, and principles of voluntary, non-binding, responsible behavior of states in this field. In 2018, the initial set of 13 rules and norms were reflected in the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 73/27. At that stage, these recommendations, of course, presented a significant step forward. However, the scale and acuity of modern threats and the growth of states' vulnerabilities in information space indicate that a voluntary and non-binding framework is not sufficient for ensuring a secure, stable, and peaceful ICT environment. So while recognizing the great importance of these voluntary 13 norms that I've mentioned before, we need to make next steps, namely to develop under the United Nations auspices an international legally binding instrument regulating states' behavior. In our view, elaborating a treaty is the only way to ensure peace and security in the ICT domain, as it will stipulate universal equal legal obligations for states rather than voluntary political commitments. Such an agreement would incorporate existing norms and new ones required for countering new and emerging challenges in the ICT realm. Particular attention should be paid to bridging the digital divide, as well as providing mechanism for the application of existing international law to the ICT environment that will allow to close the existing gaps. Building on this logic, last March, we submitted as an official document of the United Nations General Assembly 77th session the concept of a United Nations Convention on ensuring international information security. The document was presented as a food for thought for states with a number of key ideas on the substance of the future instrument. We believe that its main objectives should include preventing and settling conflicts in the global information space, as well as building trust and developing cooperation among United Nations member states, and supporting capacity building in the field of ICT security. This is briefly my comment, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kar, for sharing your views on this topic. We may come back on some of the aspects that you raised in the Q&A if there is enough time. And let's now turn to you, John. What is your understanding of how the framework can help member states in dealing with the current and evolving threat landscape?
Thank you, Samuele. My main point would be cyber capacity building and really drawing on those aspects of the framework that allow for cyber capacity building, as it's also being mentioned as one of the in one of the UN cyber norms. This is really where it starts, building the resilience of states, of societies against the current threats that we are seeing. And of course, based on the UN principles of cyber capacity building, which means really responding to the needs of the requesting states and in full respect of that state's sovereignty. So this is, I think, this would be the main contribution. I see cyber capacity building closely linked to confidence building measures. In fact, when I look at the confidence building measures that we are practicing inside the OSCE, we have a dedicated confidence building measure on cyber capacity building. And cyber capacity building in itself is a confidence building measure because, as was mentioned already, engaging in that kind of capacity building with a partner state or with a partner organization really requires a basic level of trust. Without that, you wouldn't be cooperating in that very sensitive area of your national security or of your society's security. That's also why Germany is investing a lot of work together with the Confidence Builders Group inside the open-ended working group to advance confidence building measures at the UN level. And in fact, we are just working inside this group on that particular nexus, on the nexus of CBMs and capacity building. And we hope to show during the upcoming session also how there's a very strong link and how UN confidence building measures could potentially also contribute to strengthening the role the UN is playing in the area of cyber capacity building. So I think these are the two aspects that I'd like to raise in this at this point of the debate. Thanks, Samuele.
Thank you, John. If there is time later, we'll probably also cover or ask questions on the upcoming point of contact, global point of contact directory, and how this tool may actually help member states in dealing with cyber threats. But now I would like to turn to Elaine and focusing a little bit more on certain key norms of the framework of responsible state behaviors, how, for example, implementing norm E has been mentioned quite often, also I and J would kind of help member states to cope with the threat landscape. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniela. You've just taken my main point out of my mouth. So apologies, this is going to be a repetition in some way. So I'll try to make a bit more of a point that can be operationalized more easily. So I was going to focus on norm E, norm I, and norm J, but just to say that we've already heard in the other remarks that norm I on ensuring the integrity of supply chain security and the prevention of malicious ICT tools and harmful hidden functions has figured prominently in the other, sorry, am I too close? That's okay. Okay, in the other remarks, and we've also heard about norm J, the reporting of vulnerabilities and associated information sharing. I think Eugene has pointed out very nicely that that's been one of the more challenging things to get going in real life. What I wanted to focus on and add in this debate, particularly in the context of commercial cyber intrusion capabilities, is norm E on protecting human rights, on respecting human rights and relevant resolutions of the UN Human Rights Council, which is something that hasn't figured prominently in the discussion in our panel so far. And in this context, I wanted to point out that taking this norm and also the other two norms that I've just mentioned really offers an opportunity to take evolving and emerging threats and really show in more detail and in practice how the sometimes rather vague sounding framework of responsible state behavior that we have can be put to practice in addressing concrete concerns that states as well as non-governmental stakeholders have.
Thank you, Elaine. And on this, I would like also to hear from Anastasia. You mentioned a work that you are doing at DIPLO Foundation, in particular focusing on 2 of the 11 norms, Norm A and J. A is on the integrity of supply chain again, and J on responsible reporting of vulnerabilities. So if you can enlighten us a bit on how kind of really practically implement these norms when it comes facing the threat landscape. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I would indeed try to first highlight that the framework sets important expectations. I think the challenge, also what we're learning within the dialogue, working with the diverse 50 experts coming from industry, academia, civil society, and technical community from different parts of the world. The challenge is that different actors may take different from the agreed formulations and have different sets of expectations on how the norms in particular should be implemented in the end. And that's why our, at least, practice shows that discussions where various actors can share their understanding, build a common understanding, share what works, what doesn't work, this is all very important. And again, given the fact that we're all dealing with the threats of international nature, such discussions should not be ideally restricted to the participation of experts based on the stakeholder status or nationality. Specifically, if we look at the norms of I and J, that's the focus of the Geneva Dialogue was last year, where we produced also the Geneva Manual, a comprehensive guide on what possible roles and responsibilities different non-state stakeholders could have in this regard. I'd like just to name few particular implementation measures. First, discussions of what could be universally agreed evaluation criteria and rules for ICT supply chain security have been named as the most important across other measures by industry partners. Today, probably no one is capable of building reliable and secure ICT networks and products completely alone from scratch. This is not cost effective, this is technologically challenging for many organizations. But in reality, where tech competition heavily influences security, we need to develop a better understanding of different risks and expected criteria which suppliers have to meet to address those risks. And such standardized approaches would help make supply chain security more predictable and transparent. Another very important example that we heard constantly from also civil society, that it's important to prevent establishing laws and regulations which mandate reporting of unpatched vulnerabilities to anyone else but code owners. The decision that we already seen in emerging regulations lead actually to more security risks, and this certainly goes in an opposite direction than the GG norm prescribes. And a final note, just in one other example, of course, that's not exhaustive list. There are many new hot topics, of course, to discuss these days, such as emerging tech, AI, but we still, as the international community, seems haven't figured out how to improve the existing models of how digital products are actually being developed. And I'm speaking here of open source software community and still quite unbalanced relationships between the open source software developers and the companies that critically rely on the code that actually people may for free and voluntarily produce. And still the open source software, even though that's highly important component of all the ICTs that we use today, poses the risks that we need to find somehow to address. And definitely if more discussions would be in this regard, so addressing the security of open source software will have facilitated implementation of the norms, particularly the norms also relate to the protection of the critical infrastructure. So that would be brief points from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anastasia, and thank you also for fleshing out certain capabilities. It would be interesting to kind of relate the capabilities that you mentioned with capacity building interventions, but we may leave that as another topic to follow up on during the Q&A session. And before turning to the last topic I would like to address during this panel, Eugene, so we heard that there are like expectations, of course, on how the framework of responsible state behavior can help member states to cope with such threats, but how realistic are these expectations? What's your understanding?
Okay, thank you, Samuele. So my view is basically having rules of the road or even a framework already enables states to tailor their relationship and risk undertaken with regard to use of ICT. There are 3 C's that I actually want to focus with regard to the framework of responsible state behavior, namely compliance, cooperation, and consequences. So compliance, much of this rests on how states actually accept this framework and how their policies and actual decisions align with such a framework. This may be difficult, but states need to show that they are serious about keeping to this normative framework. The propensity to cheat increases with every episode of non-compliance, and the effectiveness of the framework to prevent, disrupt, or mitigate malicious activity decreases. So it's compliance is of huge importance. Second C is cooperation. So the norms, first and foremost, norms of responsible state behavior, first and foremost, call on states to cooperate and not do things unilaterally. We need to start building these bridges and confidence among states. States can choose to share resources for collective ICT security through joint advisories or joint operations to disable malicious actors. Adhering to such a framework of cooperation also progresses the discussions at the UN on peace and security in the use of ICTs and brings us closer to an ICT environment that is safe and conducive for development. And the last C, consequences. So with a framework of responsible state behavior, you also have what is irresponsible. So when irresponsible behavior happens, there should be consequence. This should be viewed separately from punishment and maybe more natural rather than being directed by states. For stakeholders, it may actually take the form of choosing not to operate in a non-compliant territory, despite having demand for their products or it's the only product that you can use. And it shouldn't be seen as a political tool denying the development of ICT in any given territory. It's a risk decision. So, and the converse is also true, where when states are more responsible, there is that environment where where businesses are willing to actually invest. So having these 3 C's in place, together with what John was saying, confidence building and capacity building, I think this framework helps to prevent, disrupt, and mitigate the effects of malicious cyber activities because there's clarity over what happens when a malicious activity operation takes place. So, yeah.
Thank you, Eugene, for sharing these 3 C's. Of course, the framework is set within an environment, an international environment with all its limitations and constraints. So that's also a good segue to kind of try to address the last question that I would like our panel to discuss. Looking beyond the United Nations, what other possible mechanisms, tools, solutions that can be leveraged to address the threat landscape. Maybe I can start this time here in the room and ask Hélène to give it a first go. Over to you, thanks.
Sure, thank you. So I'll start with two fairly obvious points. One is that there are several mechanisms outside the UN that could be leveraged. So that's fairly straightforward. But to me, the second point is the important one, which is then a challenge arises for the international community and for all the stakeholders involved, which is how to keep all those different efforts coherent and ideally mutually reinforcing. So there shouldn't be a duplication of work. Things ideally shouldn't turn out to be counterproductive or incoherent. So we have, different norms or different expectations proliferating in different organizations. So those are the two baseline points I'd like to start with. And I'll focus the rest of my remarks on commercial cyber intrusion capabilities, because that's my shtick on the panel. But before I dive into that, I'm going to say another remark that applies, I think, to most, if not all of the emerging problems and malicious activities that we've talked about, is that when we try to look at what other mechanisms are there outside of the UN and how they relate to UN processes, we a lot of the times need to start at the beginning, and we actually need to do some identifying and mapping to figure out what is actually out there that is already going on in terms of existing processes. And agencies, organizations that work on this within the UN and outside of it, and also what potential other mechanisms or processes, again, inside and outside of the UN, could be leveraged. So there's a lot of baseline research work that needs to go into this, that is just plain identification and mapping of what is out there and what could be out there. Now, getting into the issue of commercial cyber intrusion capabilities, it's actually interesting for me because a lot of policy activities has already happened outside of the UN framework. So a lot of things happened with outside mechanisms, and now this topic is becoming more prominent in the international cybersecurity discussions. So with regard to commercial capabilities, there's been a very interesting process around multilateral export controls. For those of you who may not be aware, in 2013, so over 10 years ago, certain cyber tools have already been added to the Wassenaar arrangement, which is a multilateral export control tool. This is a very interesting policy effort. I'd encourage everyone to look into it. I'm a geek about it. But I think there is also, if we take these issues on more proactively in the open-ended working group, I think there's a very important lessons learned to be taken from how states and non-stakeholders have dealt with this problem in this framework or in this arrangement, which focuses on just one aspect of the product lifecycle of these tools, which is the transfer. So the sale across country borders. Now, in addition to that process that's been in the past, there is very recent developments that are quite important in this area. In February 2024, so as of today, last month, the UK and France kicked off what's called the Pall Mall process to tackle the proliferation and irresponsible use of commercial cyber intrusion capabilities. So that's a space to watch, which is compared in contrast to the multilateral export controls, is a multi-stakeholder format of discussion. So we'll hopefully bring in not just governments, but also a variety of non-state stakeholders. And on top of that, we also have several private sector initiatives or hybrid initiatives. So we've seen several big companies.
Sorry, Elaine, to jump in. Maybe we can let other also speakers. Yes, because
Sure.
we're running short of time,
Yeah.
and I would like also to take some questions from the floor. We will definitely talk about other private sector initiatives. Thank you for your first round of thought on that. Maybe Anastasia, what, if you really can be brief on that as well, what is your understanding of a possible other mechanism in this domain? Thanks.
Thanks a lot, and also to Elaine for actually bringing up the recent examples of the Pall Mall process. I think that's indeed a very important process to look at, how the diplomatic arrangements actually being emerged into the more tangible. But overall, what are the mechanisms? I think what first comes to our mind is the work of the regional organizations, the regional normative frameworks. That what we want to learn as well within Geneva Dialogue, to learn how actually regional organizations step up the operationalization of the agreed framework and what possible contributions from the non-state stakeholders could be in this regard, particularly from the industry, to help implement certain confidence building measures. Absolutely national public-private partnerships, which are traditionally part of the frameworks to secure critical infrastructure facilities or critical functions. And then, of course, I would name cross-jurisdictional stakeholder engagement initiatives, which is I'm a part of, which is the Geneva Dialogue, but also other multi-stakeholder initiatives, which are quite well known and also coming from the industry, Cyber Tech Accord, Cyber Trust Chart from the industry in Europe, and few others. So I think those very good examples how actually framework continues to exist and be discussed by multiple stakeholders to find more tangible solutions to make it work.
Thank you, Anastasia. And Eugene, would you like to add something on this?
Okay, thank you, Samuele. So I think there are two main thrusts that can be harnessed to achieve responsible state behavior. First is to, like what Elaine and Anastasia have said, is to solve threats with like-minded states and stakeholders in an ad hoc manner, deal with, and second, to lean on regional organizations. So on the first point, there's on problem solving with like-minded states. Other than the Palmo process, there's also a group of states that have made ransomware its focus, but there are many, many more issues at hand. So can states be called to work together on more issues, such as to secure to secure and strengthen supply chain integrity, or to protect operational technology? I'm not so sure, because not all stakeholders and states see threats the same way. But I'm sure that these questions may be best answered outside the UN framework, because informal groupings can be useful to tackle such specific issues, and speed is actually, I don't think, is the UN's strength, actually. So the second point is the role of regional organizations. So things may actually move faster with regional organizations because there is a regional context to deal with things. And if there's political will within the region, I think it's much easier to leverage ICTs as vectors of development, or come up with a common position, like the African Union just released a paper on international law, and like ASEAN choosing to be guided by the 11 norms as early as 2018 as a political decision. So I think this is a trend that might continue into the future, where groups of states and stakeholders can be convinced to adopt common positions or understanding on what constitutes responsible behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. And I would like now to turn to Carl. We've been talking about a possible solution outside the UN, and also the criticism over the fact that the UN might be too slow or cumbersome to deal with such a topic. What's your understanding on this?
Well, thank you very much again for giving me a floor. And so my thought is, in response to your question, is that the United Nations plays and should continue to play a leading role in dealing with ICT security issues. May I remind you that the United Nations is dealing with these issues for 25 years now, because the first resolution regarding the international security issues has been adopted in 1998. So since that time, United Nations is actively working in this field through adopting United Nations General Assembly resolutions and through a respective negotiation process, which is currently taking place at the open-ended working group. I would say that the open-ended working group allows all United Nations member states to participate on a fair and equal footing in the decision-making process on these important matters, thanks to consensus-based procedure, which is very, very important from our view. Although finding solutions that are acceptable to all countries is not an easy task, the group has been able to prove its efficiency in practice. May I remind you that it has managed to adopt concrete measures to ensure ICT security, like the recent decision to establish a global intergovernmental POC directory. Therefore, we are convinced that the open-ended working group should continue to serve as the sole platform for interstate negotiations on ICT security and get a permanent mandate after 2025. In our view, the idea of any parallel processes outside the United Nations is inappropriate, as it duplicates the efforts of the international community and undermines the authority of the open-ended working group. What is more, no multilateral venue other than the United Nations enjoys the same level of representativeness and expertise on international security issues, including in the digital realm. Regional organizations in this field should not attempt to replace or substitute the United Nations activities, but rather complement them with creative ideas. However, we should bear in mind that threats and measures to counter them vary from one region to another and may not be automatically applicable elsewhere. We are also well aware that some states promote initiatives to establish some political frameworks platforms with a view to monitoring the implementation of the United Nations rules of responsible behavior and holding states accountable for alleged violations. To our view, it is not appropriate for somebody proclaims itself judge in the ICT environment. To our view, it is essential that universal implementation and verification mechanism should be included in a future legally binding instrument to be developed strictly under the United Nations auspices. I've already mentioned about the...
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carl. Sorry to jump in, but I really need to give the floor to the last speaker before devoting only 5 minutes to the Q&A. And sorry for that. John, what's your understanding on the topic? I know that Germany is also part of the International Counter-Ransom Initiative. So if you can give your view on possible other mechanism outside, but at the same time complementary if possible, and how they can relate to the work conducted at the open-ended working group. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me say, first of all, that our main focus, our priority is really building a stronger UN role in cybersecurity. So that's really our priority before we look beyond the UN. That's why we are so much engaged in making sure that we have an active participation of stakeholders in the work of the open-ended working group, because we need those stakeholders on board to talk meaningfully about implementation of the framework. That's also why we are working with the majority of UN countries to establish a program of action at the UN as an implementation-based mechanism. However, for certain topics, it is difficult to advance them inside the United Nations. And one of those topics is ransomware. The reason why we feel this can't be adequately addressed at the United Nations is that some countries do not take the due diligence principle seriously, which is enshrined in the UN cyber norms. And that means that sometimes you need to get together as an alliance of states that actually work on due diligence and see how you can advance work in that group. And the counter-ransomware initiative that's been set up by the United States is one such example where we are working with a cross-regional group of countries to really counter that threat, also in an operational way, sharing best practices, also working on cyber capacity building. Actually, Germany leads the cyber capacity building track and signed the counter-ransomware initiative together with Nigeria. So that's an example how you can make progress on a focused topic within an alliance of states. Because, you know, at some point, we need to be clear that repressive measures are also needed in order to make sure that the framework is being protected. Sometimes you need to call the police to work, of course, based on international law and in full respect of state sovereignty, but you need repressive measures in order to take out ransomware groups before they destabilize entire nations.
Thank you, John. And this also resonates with something that was already mentioned by other speakers, including, I remember, the point on consequences raised by Eugene. I just now would like to turn on the questions online. I see several, probably we won't be able to tackle all of them. The most voted one, and it's open to all the speakers to respond, is can cybersecurity norms, behaviors, and protection be regulated into customary international law? Who wants to respond to this one? Eugene? I'm not calling you on the spot. So the question is, can cybersecurity norms, behavior, and protections be regulated into customary international law? Even on, I can't see if on the screen they are online. They are.
I guess the practice.
I can take a stab at it.
Okay, Elaine, you can give it a first go.
Sure. I guess why I asked you to read the question out loud, I think Eugene and I were both having trouble with the question itself, because to me, customary international law and regulation throws up a bit of a dichotomy. So you can't, like, if you're regulating something, if you're putting something on paper, or if you're agreeing on something, then that is either codifying international law or laying it down. So that is not customary international law. So I guess I'm having a bit trouble with the question. So I'll rephrase it into a question that I can answer: whether, you know, customary international law can develop in this area to regulate cybersecurity, which is yes, of course it can. We have two parts to customary international law. For those who are not aware, it's the practice, it's consistent state practice, and it's the expression of that practice as a legal view. So the states need to say, we're doing this because out of a legal obligation, we think this is a legal obligation, and we don't just happen to be doing it this way. So these are the two elements that you would need, and I think, you know, there's, I'm sure, a lot of research that can already be done to look at state practice to see with the different areas of the normative framework to see, you know, are there parts that could already qualify as customary international law, because that's how states have been doing it, and they also have these corresponding state views.
All
so
right,
that's my first stab at this.
Thank
Eugene.
you, Elaine. Eugene, actually, for you, there is a direct question. So I'm going to ask it directly to you instead of the other one. So what step can a state take in sharing information and reporting their vulnerabilities without becoming more susceptible of cyber attacks?
Well, so to me, information sharing does not have to be attributional. So you don't have to say, like, look, this attack was done by some other state actor or something, like, or a non-state actor. Doing so might invite repercussions, but I think if you do it in a way which it's really trying to solve a problem, I think there is basically a way that it's not seeking to seek political mileage. I think that would be the most neutral way I could put this. You can share information in a very non-political way. what the vectors of the attack is, what actually has happened, blow by blow. Maybe if you want, have a committee of inquiry, like what Singapore did in 2018 with the Sing Health attack, when the healthcare provider was had a massive data breach. There was a parliamentary committee of inquiry detailing what had happened step by step and where the processes you need to improve. So
thank you, Eugene. We are really running short of time. I just want to check if speakers online have maybe anything that they want to add really quickly. Otherwise, I must end the panel here because we have a hard stop. Do we see?
I can add just briefly.
All right, Anastasia, really telegraphic, please.
Okay, I'll try. So I guess the practice shows that with regard to the information sharing between states, trust is one of the challenges. If you know how the information that you share to another partner, how it will be dealt, how it will be further processed, and if you know personally, at least the person who are in charge of getting this information, that helps a lot. So in this regard, again, building capacities, but also building confidence on continuous and a regular basis. That's, I think, the ingredient, not that really fast and quick, but still that's the ingredient to facilitate information sharing. In terms of the best practices, I think we could look at the EU example of the cyclone and in other frameworks, how we're actually 27 countries successfully mature in this regard. So that would be brief intervention.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. John, Carl, I guess anything to add? Otherwise, we really need to close. I don't think so. So let me join in a round of applause to our speakers. And thank you very much for your interventions. And now I'm inviting you to the lunch. Again, Vienna Cafe, first floor, basement. I mean, it's in the basement inside the UN HQ. And we can resume the conference at 3 p.m. Thank you.